California Governor Gavin Newsom is looking ahead to his re-election campaign next year after defeating Republican-backed efforts to recall him from office.
Tonight, I'm humbled, grateful, but resolved in the spirit of my political hero, Robert Kennedy, to make more gentle the life of this world.
Well, there's a long list of Republican candidates who challenged Newsom, including conservative radio host Larry Elder. He was considered a frontrunner in the polls since entering the race in July. But as Newsom racked up the votes last night, Elder conceded the race. For a closer look at what these results mean, I want to bring in CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist Antjuan Seawright and CBS News political analyst and Republican strategist Leslie Sanchez. Good to see you both. Antjuan, let me start with you.
Good morning.
Did this outcome surprise you? Were you worried? And what does it say about the state of the Democrats in California?
Well, good morning, Vlad, and thank you for having me. Look, was I worried? There are two ways to run in campaigns. You run unopposed or scared. And so I come from the school of thought you should always run scared if you have an opponent on the ballot. The truth of the matter is, from a registration gap and from the early turnout numbers that I mentioned with Lana Zach last Sunday on CBS, I felt very comfortable that Governor Newsom would have a very handsome election night, and he did. If you look at the results and you really unpack the results from last night that we've seen so far, he's winning by a 2-to-1 margin. The fact of the matter is he's overperformed in 6 counties that he performed in his last election and in the Biden 2020 election, and he only underperformed in 1 election. So that tells me that science won the night, that his COVID policies and agenda was actually beneficial to the people of California. And the fact of the matter is, elections are about coalitions and constituencies. The coalition and constituencies that gave him a handsome election night are very similar to those that gave President Biden a very nice election night in 2020. So I feel good. Now, what we cannot do as Democrats is take this and think it's transferable to 2022, because every race is different, every election is different, and the ballots and the consequences of every election is different. However, I do think when you compare last night to what we should see in Virginia with Governor McCullough, as you mentioned in your opening, I think you can make some real comparisons, and Democrats have some things that we can learn from and grow from when it comes to last night.
So, Leslie, CBS News exit polling asked voters what they believe the most important issue is in California. 31% said the coronavirus. Not surprising. That's part of the reason there was enough momentum to get to this recall election. But following right. that the coronavirus was homelessness and then the economy. So first, Leslie, then Antjuan, what do these results tell us about where voters' heads are during this recall?
I think we're still in the politics of fear, Anne-Marie, and I think I would agree with Antjuan on that. Except, Antjuan's talking about campaigns run, scared to work hard. I think this was a campaign that was just flooded with the idea of fear of moving back to Trumpism, and with so many families feeling that they had to take responsibility for themselves, and they didn't have support or clarity from the federal government, and certainly mixed messages from the state government, that COVID would continue to be up there, but this kind of undercurrent of what does that mean for their household, their pocketbook, and their state that they love so much. And these issues of homelessness have been tremendous failures under the current governor. The issues of the economy, the state is continuing to struggle, and a lot of the economic message, and the reason we were having the recall, one of the reasons anyway, was a failure of management, billions of dollars in unemployment benefits going to fraudulent accounts and not to the Californians who are really deserving. So these issues are going to continue to be top of mind, not only through this year, but certainly through 2022 and until we ride out a new normal with the pandemic.
Supporters of the recall were frustrated over business closures and pandemic restrictions, and they fought for this recall, while Republican governors in several states were fighting mask and vaccine mandates. But in our polling, we found the majority of voters thought Governor Newsom's COVID-19 restrictions have been, quote, about right. Leslie, what would a Republican candidate for governor running next year need to do to overcome what you're seeing there on the screen, which is that people, by and large, seem to agree with Governor Newsom? They may not have liked the hypocrisy in going to a fancy, dinner at the French Laundry while you're scolding the constituents of your state to stay indoors, but they got, I guess, over that and thought about the bigger picture, which is, how to keep your neighbors and friends safe.
Vlad, I don't think we know the answer to that on this issue of using it as a campaign tactic of vaccines and vaccinations, at least how it's going to affect candidates moving into 2022, the distance from now. Anything in the shorter term, it's going to have a dramatic impact because we are all riding through this other iteration of our lives through COVID. Let's not forget, Gavin Newsom had to rely on every major hitter in the Democratic Party to come to the state to save something that should not have been necessary because of the incredibly restrictive efforts and the devastating impact it had on small businesses, on children's learning and not being able to get back to schools. And those are still struggles that people are having today. But as it relates to this vaccine and kind of overreach of the government, that is a constantly recalibrating issue. The Delta variant has changed that. It's a conversation. But as the Democrats, I think successfully, painted Republicans as not being reasonable on these efforts, as giving up some degree of their freedoms for the security, for public safety, for public community effect, and painted as if it's out of the norm to be defending those ideals. I think a lot of voters thought it was a reasonable ask. And as long as it's seen that way, and Republicans are seen as kind of outside those lines, it's going to be an effective strategy. But what I'm saying, Vlad, is that barometer is moving. And voters are going to continue to feel that overreaching of the government, of state and federal government, can impact their pocketbook and impact their personal lives. It's going to change how they vote and how they feel. Mm.
Antjuan, sort of continuing what Leslie was saying, when we were talking to Major Garrett, he said that increasingly other Republicans, for lack of a better phrase, were getting frustrated with Larry Elder because he was sounding more and more Trumpy. And when Major sat down with him and had a really good interview, he started to really back away from some of the more Trumpy statements that he had said. I wonder if we can draw anything from this, because he was the lead Republican. So clearly that kind of language got Republicans fired up enough, but not enough to get rid of the current governor. So and clearly leading Republicans were annoyed by it. So I'm wondering if you sense a move away from these sort of more Trumpy candidates when you see what happened with Larry Elder, or perhaps not at all, because you see how fired up Republicans were to at least to put him in the lead contender against Newsom.
I think it varies from place to place and race to race. In some places, the politics and the language and rhetoric of Donald Trump is politically sexy. So you'll see a lot of candidates and causes wrap their arms and cover and play footsie with it. But in a place like California, and with COVID and quality of life issues being the bread and butter that runs the day, this was not a good idea for the leading candidate to do so. And I think he paid pricely for that at the polls. And I think the Republican Party overall will pay a price if they decide to adopt the politics of Donald Trump. Keep in mind, President Trump lost the previous election to President Biden. It's President Biden's COVID policies that Governor Newsom had adopted for the most part in the state to keep people safe. And while there are some Republican governors around the country who have locked down and have kind of really dug in on this fact that we're not going to abide by what comes from Washington, D.C. and the D.C. federal bureaucrats, as I've heard some of them say to me personally, the truth of the matter is these things have arguably been working to keep people safe and keep people alive. And in these states where Republican governors are locking down, you see the numbers increasing, you see people dying, but you also see local governments defying what the statewide implements may be and doing their own thing to keep people safe. And so when it comes to last night's race and when it comes to the long-term thinking, I don't think it's beneficial in certain places for certain Republicans to adopt the principles of thinking of Donald Trump.
Leslie, it's such an interesting point that Antjuan and Anne-Marie are making. And we asked Major Garrett about this as well, and he said that Larry Elder basically said it would be easier for him to win a national election, even the presidency, or at least be competitive if he were running for the presidency, as opposed to winning as a Republican in California. And it just made me think, Antjuan, you said it was probably not a good strategy to tack too closely to President Trump, but he's a smart guy. Let's not forget, Larry Elder is, a graduate of an Ivy League university, which isn't an indication of intelligence, but it certainly shows that, he's highly educated. He got his JD at the University of Michigan. He's not a dumb guy. He probably realized maybe too late that being too close to Trump in a state like California is not a winning strategy, but nationally, that might be a winning strategy. And I wonder, Leslie, if he isn't at some level a little bit like Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan, you recall, back in 1964, delivered an incredible speech at the Republican National Convention for Barry Goldwater. Barry Goldwater lost that national election, but then Ronald Reagan was elected a few years later as governor of California. And of course, we all know he ultimately was elected as president. I sort of see Larry Elder as being Reagan-esque in maybe eclipsing California and having a bigger platform nationally. What do you think?
The other similarity, Vlad, is they were both radio guys, like in the sense that Ronald Reagan spent 7-8 years out in the communities, kind of developing very cogent ideas independently on taxation, on the former Soviet Union, on communism, and just very clear sense of his ideals moving forward, and that kind of gelled into where he's going. Larry Elder's had such incredible name ID from his radio personality that, yes, in a very crowded field, by virtue of that, he did have the strongest name ID, which put him at the top of the ticket. But there were other very strong, viable candidates that would have been better alternatives. It is using him as the foil, as the second version of Trump, and this Trumpism argument is where Republicans are going to kind of have some heartache and some headache until we figure out what the right balance is. But what's interesting, Vlad, on that point, there will be the next generation of this that will probably be a hybrid of these state ideals, state reforms, things that work locally, challenging the system in Washington, has a lot, kind of the tone of Trumpism, that populist movement, but is going to be something that I think independents and certainly these increasingly communities of color, particularly Latino voters, are going to be listening to. And that's what's going to make this very competitive. So this new kind of face of the Republican Party is still evolving.
Well, we will see. I don't know. Mr. Elder may just dust
Mark the
himself
date.
off and get ready for the next election himself.
We predicted
right,
it.
Mark the date.
Yeah.
Leslie and Antjuan, thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.